Death at Gallows Green. Chapter 34. Mordre vol Oat. Chanticleer. Geoffrey Chaucer, The Nun's Priest's Tale. It was the morning after the discovery of the grain sacks in the barn, and Charles and Edward were on their way to Highfields Farm in the fly Charles had brought from Marston Manor. After the departure of Miss Ardley and Miss Potter, the vigil had been unproductive, and they had abandoned it at 3 in the morning. The lane was open to green fields on one side and hedged on the other with hawthorn, its white blossoms mixed with the pink of wild roses. A tall elm stood beside the gate of Highfields Farm, its branches laden with rooks' nests, a dovecot fixed in the fork. Beyond the elm, on the far side of the farmhouse, was a muddy sty containing 2 portly Berkshire pigs. The farmhouse itself was small and built of brick, the tiles of its roof furred with lichen and moss, a thin smudge of blue smoke from the chimney and into the misty morning. In the orchard a hen cackled, and cheerfully announcing a fresh laid egg. "Nathan, you say?" Charles pulled back on the rein and slowed the horse. Bradford's groom had fitted him out with a smart, high-stepping filly this morning, eager to show her mettle. "That's the name," Edward replied. "Said to have been a ship's carpenter at Harwich before he rented this place." Why would a man leave a dependable trade for the uncertain rewards of farming? "He's one of the new 4-acre farmers," Edward said. "I heard he means to make the farm into a market garden." He was thoughtful. The scheme might work at that. The farm is close enough to Colchester and Manningtree, and vegetables bring a good price all season. He could crop fodder for gentlemen's stables on the rest of the acreage and do well enough for himself. "It's a wish I've had for myself as well for some time now," he added. "A market garden, a few pigs and chickens, a small dairy." He paused. "But a man can't manage all that alone. I should need a wife." "You should indeed," Charles agreed in an even tone, trying to picture Miss Ardley in an apron making cheeses or curing bacon. But Bradford planned to press his suit this afternoon, and any sensible lady would surely prefer to live on a manor than on a farm. For Ned's sake, he was sorry. For his own, he was even sorrier still. "The thought of taking a wife has come to me more and more since Artie's death." Edward's voice was wistful. "I doubt, however, that she would want to." But Edward's reflections were interrupted by the sound of hammering. They had arrived at the house. Charles stopped the fly and got out and tied the horse, and he and Edward followed the path around the back. A man in a leather jerkin was pounding nails into a windlass frame that stood over the well, rebuilding it from the look of the rotten pieces of wood scattered on the ground. Several black hens and a red rooster with iridescent green tail feathers pecked greedily at the wood, digging out grubs. Edward raised his voice. "Mr. Nathan." The man in the jerkin turned, his hammer poised. He was slender and loose-limbed, the sleeves of his grey shirt, too short by inches, exposing skinny wrists covered with a coarse mat of dark hair that extended into the back of his hands. The corner of his mouth twitched nervously under a brush of dark moustache, and his eyes were deep-set under a thicket of black brows that grew together in the middle. "Now, Nathan." His voice was a boy's tremolo, although he was a man of nearly middle age. Edward introduced himself and Charles. "We have come to inquire about the grain in the barn." "Grain?" Nathan asked. His dark eyes flicked from Edward, who was uniformed, to Charles, who wore his khaki jacket and Norfolk tweeds. He went back to Edward. "There's no grain in the barn, Constable," he said roughly. "I didn't sow last year. I only sowed the hay Stanton." "I know you didn't sow, Mr. Nathan," Edward said patiently. "The fact remains, however, that your barn is stocked with over hundreds of sacks of wheat. At least one load has already been hauled from there to the river, where it was carried onto a—" "If you're saying I'm a thief," Nathan broke in violently, "you're wrong." He slammed the hammer onto the ground in an unconvincing show of anger. The chickens fled, clucking and fluttering, all but the rooster, who stood his ground, flapping his wings in a show of bravery. "If there's grain in that barn, it's none of mine," Nathan shouted over the noise. "'Twas put there without me knowing." "Theft isn't the only issue here," Charles put in, watching the man's face. A constable was murdered in your barn." Napthan's eyes opened wide. "Murdered? You are aware of Sergeant Oliver's demise, I presume," Charles said. Of course he was aware. Everyone for miles knew of the murder. "I am," Napthan swallowed fearfully, his Adam's apple a bony knob in his neck. "But I didn't." His mouth jerked. "'Pon my honor, if murder was done here, I'm ignorant." The rooster crowed, and several hens came out of hiding for another go at the bugs in the rotten wood. "Your honor," Edward leaned forward, his voice flinty, "a constable was murdered here, and you have the gall to talk about honor." "I don't know naught. I swear it." Napthan was swallowed up by his fear. His teeth chattered. "I swear." "Murder was done," Charles said softly, "in your barn. We have the evidence to prove it in a court of law." "God, oh God, oh God!" Napthan's voice cracked in a soprano whimper. I told him." "What did you tell them, Mr. Napthan?" Edward asked. The man leaned against the half-built windlass as if all the strength had gone out of his thin legs. "I told them 'twas risky. I warned them to be careful. I was feared." The words died into a long shudder. A drop of spittle hung on his moustache. "Told who?" Edward asked sharply. When Napthan did not answer, his voice became grim. "Do you want to be tried at the summer assizes for Constable Oliver's murder? Come on, man, talk." "The grain, yes." Napthan wiped his mouth with the back of his furry hand. His eyes were dark with panic, his voice tinny. "They wanted the barn to store the wheat till it could be moved, and they offered a fair price, but had naught to do with murder." "Did you know the men to be thieves?" Edward asked. Napthan looked down at his feet. "Not exactly. They said the barn was wanted for extra storage." "Did you know they were moving the grain at night?" "Well, Charles could hear in that lengthy syllable a whole paragraph of admission. Of course the man had known. He had known he was letting the barn to thieves, and that the grain was being smuggled to a ship in the estuary. Perhaps he had helped steal the grain. Perhaps he had even rented the farm for the purpose of obtaining the barn, to store the stolen wheat until it could be smuggled out by boat. But the extent of Napthan's guilty involvement could be determined later. Other matters took precedence. "To whom did you let the barn?" Charles asked. Napthan licked his mustache. "Name's Todd," he whispered. "Russell Todd." The rooster crowed again, jubilant over a newfound cache of grubs. He picked up the fattest one and laid it at the feet of one of the hens, who picked at it greedily. "Who else was involved?" Charles asked. "Todd paid the money, but there were a man with him. Brock, he called him. He never saw the others." Napthan was sullen now, conscious of his betrayal and profoundly aware of the consequence. Charles understood. Even if the man could convince a jury of his peers that he was innocent of Artie's murder, he could not continue to work this farm, nor live in this country. For the villagers and farmers round about, betrayal was a heinous crime. Having cast his lot with thieves, Napthan was honour bound to keep his mouth shut. That he had not doomed him, and he knew it. The rooster crowed once again.